most feared motorcycle club in history, has faced many enemies, but none more dangerous than those from within. These are the stories of men who wore the winged death head patch, who lived by the code of angels forever, forever angels, yet whose actions nearly brought down the entire organization. Their tales of betrayal, greed, and revenge reveal how close the mighty Hells Angels came to complete destruction. The desperate father who started it all. Luke Cook never imagined that owning a failing bar in Thailand would lead him to death row. The Australian FIFO worker had built what he thought was a simple life in Pattaya, a modest bar and guest house that catered to expats looking for cheap drinks and even cheaper thrills. But in 2015, his businesses were hemorrhaging money faster than he could count. His savings had vanished into the tropical heat, and desperation was setting in like the Thai humidity that never seemed to lift. Cook represented everything that made him the perfect target for recruitment by international criminals. Married with 2 young sons, he had that family man image that made him appear trustworthy to anyone watching from the outside. His legitimate businesses provided perfect cover for illegal activities that nobody would suspect. Most importantly, his mounting financial troubles made him vulnerable to offers that seemed too good to be true. What Cook didn't know was that his predicament had already been noticed by someone far more dangerous than any debt collector. And this man's solution would eventually see Cook facing execution by the Thai government. The transformation from legitimate businessman to international drug smuggler began so slowly it was almost imperceptible. Antonio Bagnato, a fugitive Australian kickboxer, rented a room above Cook's bar and quickly became a regular fixture in his daily routine. Bagnato presented himself as just another Aussie expat trying to make a fresh start in Thailand, but his real identity was far more sinister than Cook could have imagined. He was a wanted man, having fled Australia after his involvement in the murder of 25-year-old Dylan over a debt dispute in August 2014. Cook's natural friendliness and genuine desire to help fellow Australians made him an easy mark for Bagnato's careful manipulation. As their friendship deepened over shared beers and stories of home, Cook began opening up about his financial struggles, unknowingly providing Bagnato with the intelligence he needed to assess Cook's potential value to his criminal associates. Every conversation about mounting debts, failing businesses, and sleepless nights worrying about his family's future was being mentally catalogued by a predator who saw golden opportunity in desperate circumstances. But Bagnato wasn't working alone in this elaborate setup. Through him, Cook was about to meet Wayne Schneider, a notorious Hells Angels member who would make Cook an offer that would change his life forever. What Cook couldn't have imagined was that accepting this offer would not only lead him to death row, but would also trigger a chain of betrayal and murder that would shake the Hells Angels organization to its very core. And this was just the beginning of a story that would eventually span multiple countries and destroy dozens of lives in its wake. The architect of a criminal empire. Wayne Schneider was already a legend in Australian criminal circles long before he stepped foot in Thailand. With 375 intelligence entries and 8 outstanding warrants against him, he had built a methamphetamine empire across Sydney's sprawling suburbs that supplied dealers throughout New South Wales. His laboratories in Newralyn and Catherine Fields were sophisticated operations that produced industrial quantities of crystal methamphetamine. But when Australian police began closing in on his network, Schneider demonstrated the same cunning that had made him successful. He vanished into thin air. 2 days before police obtained their search warrant for his labs, Schneider had boarded a plane to Thailand, his new home and the base for what would become an even more ambitious criminal enterprise. The next day, Australian police found his abandoned laboratories, but by then their primary target was already on the opposite side of the world, planning operations that would make his Australian dealings look like small-time street dealing. In Pattaya's red light district, Schneider created something that would have made his American brothers proud. Angel's Place, a legitimate Hells Angels clubhouse that served as the nerve center for operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. From this heavily fortified compound decorated with the club's distinctive Death's Head logo, he orchestrated drug shipments from Chinese laboratories to Australian streets, using a network of desperate expats and local contacts who were all too willing to risk everything for what seemed like easy money in paradise. Schneider's genius lay not in his ability to move drugs. Plenty of criminals could do that, but in his supernatural talent for reading people like open books. He could identify weakness, desperation, and greed with the precision of a surgeon, then exploit those vulnerabilities to build an army of unwitting accomplices who would do his dirty work while he remained safely in the shadows. When he looked at Luke Cook, he saw the perfect smuggler, a family man with maritime experience, legitimate businesses for cover, and the kind of financial desperation that would make him willing to take enormous risks for the promise of quick money. The plan that Schneider hatched would involve moving a ton of pure methamphetamine worth $300 million on Australian streets. The drugs would be manufactured in Chinese laboratories, transported by fishing trawler to international waters where no country's laws applied, then picked up by Cook using his legitimate yacht business as perfect cover. For Cook's services, Schneider was offering $10 million, more money than the struggling businessman had ever dreamed of making in his entire lifetime. But Schneider's towering ambition would ultimately become his downfall in ways he never anticipated. What he didn't foresee was that his trusted associate Antonio Bagnato was harboring deadly secrets of his own, and that their partnership would end in torture, murder, and the complete exposure of his entire criminal empire. The very greed and ruthless calculation that had built Schneider's success was about to destroy him, and nearly bring down the Hells Angels organization along with him in a spectacular fashion that would shock the international criminal underworld. The perfect crime that went horribly wrong. The night of June 15, 2015, should have been routine for Luke Cook, but it would end with him making a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his natural life. As his yacht cut through the dark waters of the South China Sea under a blanket of stars, Cook was probably thinking about what he would do with his $10 million payday. Pay off crushing debts, save his failing businesses, maybe even take his family on a proper vacation for the first time in years. What he wasn't thinking about was the Thai naval patrol that was quietly tracking his movements through the darkness with military precision. The rendezvous with the Chinese fishing trawler nicknamed Joandi went exactly as planned in those crucial first moments. 4 yellow sacks marked with red Chinese characters were transferred to Cook's yacht without incident, each one heavy with crystalline poison that would flood Australian streets for months and destroy countless lives. The exchange was quick, professional, and executed with the kind of efficiency that had made Wayne Schneider's reputation as one of Australia's most successful drug smugglers. But as Cook turned his yacht back toward the distant shore, lights suddenly appeared behind him in the darkness like malevolent eyes. The Thai Navy had spotted him, and they were closing in fast with the determination of hunters who had found their prey. In that moment of pure panic that seemed to stretch for eternity, Cook faced a choice that would define the rest of his life: surrender with the drugs aboard and face certain execution under Thailand's harsh drug laws, or dump the cargo into the ocean and hope desperately for the best outcome possible. Cook chose to fight for his life in the only way he could, watching $300 million worth of methamphetamine sink into the depths of the ocean like stones. But his problems were just beginning to unfold in ways that would make this moment seem simple by comparison. While he had avoided immediate capture and possible execution, he had also just lost the most valuable cargo in Hells Angels history, and the organization that had trusted him with their fortune would not be understanding about his failure, regardless of the circumstances that had led to this disaster. What happened next would seem almost comical if the stakes weren't so deadly serious. Cook, desperate to recover the drugs and avoid the wrath of the Hells Angels, concocted an elaborate lie to trick his friend Douglas Shoebridge into helping him. He told Shoebridge, a professional diver with years of underwater experience, that he had lost some gold in the ocean during a diving accident and needed help recovering the precious treasure. Shoebridge, intrigued by the prospect of underwater treasure hunting and the promise of easy money, agreed to help without asking too many probing questions that might have revealed the truth. This moment of deception between Cook and Shoebridge would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately destroy everyone involved and expose the inner workings of an international criminal conspiracy. The unraveling of lies. But as Shoebridge dove into the murky waters searching for what he believed was sunken gold treasure, Cook's carefully constructed web of lies began to unravel under the pressure of alcohol and overwhelming stress. The magnitude of his predicament, owing $300 million to the Hells Angels, combined with the desperate nature of their underwater search, caused Cook to make a confession that would change both their lives forever. Under the influence and consumed by panic, Cook revealed the truth about what they were really looking for in those dark waters. The revelation that they were searching for drugs, not gold, sent Shoebridge into an absolute fury that could be heard across the beach. The realization that he had been used, that he could have unwittingly aided in the recovery of enough drugs to supply entire cities, gnawed at his conscience and filled him with a rage that would later be used against Cook in a Thai courtroom. Cook was now paralyzed by panic that consumed his every waking moment. The debt he had accrued to the Hells Angels was like a ticking time bomb, and the vengeful specters of his criminal associates would soon come knocking at his door with violence in mind. The clock was ticking on his life, and their secret cargo, half a ton of pure ice, had gone missing in the depths of the ocean. probably lost forever to the currents and tides of the South China Sea. Everything that could go wrong had actually gone wrong in the most spectacular fashion possible. It was at this point that Antonio Bagnato's name once again surfaced as Cook's supposed lifeline, the old friend who would help them clean up the mess they had created. But what Cook didn't understand was that Bagnato had his own agenda, one that involved eliminating everyone who could connect him to the failed operation, starting with the man who had made it all possible in the first place. The stage was being set for a betrayal that would shock even the hardened criminals of Pattaya's underworld, and Wayne Schneider, the architect of this entire operation, was about to discover that trust among thieves was nothing more than a dangerous illusion. The hunter becomes the hunted. News of the failed drug shipment reached Wayne Schneider at his perfectly named clubhouse, Angel's Place, and his reaction was swift and brutal. A man who had built his reputation on successful operations and reliable deliveries was not about to accept the loss of $300 million without someone paying the ultimate price. The $10 million he had promised Cook was nothing compared to the fortune that now lay at the bottom of the South China Sea, and Schneider's rage was the kind that demanded blood as payment. What Schneider didn't realize in those crucial hours was that his own life was already in mortal danger from someone he trusted completely. Antonio Bagnato had been planning Schneider's murder long before the drug shipment went wrong. The kickboxer saw Schneider's wealth, power, and extensive criminal network as an opportunity to advance his own position in Thailand's criminal hierarchy, and the failed smuggling operation gave him the perfect excuse to eliminate his partner while appearing to be seeking justice for the lost drugs. The plan that Bagnato hatched was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its execution. All he needed was an opportunity to get Schneider alone and vulnerable, away from the security of Angel's Place and the protection of his fellow Hells Angels members. That opportunity came on November 30th, 2015, when tensions over the failed drug shipment reached their absolute breaking point. Schneider was lured from his heavily fortified compound on the pretext of a business meeting that promised to resolve the situation with Cook and the missing drugs. What he didn't know was that Bagnato and 4 other men were waiting for him in an upscale Pattaya residential complex, armed and ready to settle their accounts permanently. The kidnapping was captured in vivid detail on CCTV footage that would later become crucial evidence in the prosecution of everyone involved. Security guard Sufan Fifth Awakong witnessed the entire abduction as it unfolded before his eyes. He watched in horror as 5 men ruthlessly assaulted Schneider before bundling him into the back of a white Toyota utility vehicle. Only one of the attackers wasn't wearing a mask to conceal his identity: Antonio Bagnato, whose face was clearly visible on the security cameras. This crucial oversight would ultimately lead to his downfall, but not before he had accomplished his primary objective of eliminating Wayne Schneider forever. What followed was 9 hours of torture and interrogation that would have broken most men, but Schneider showed remarkable courage in his final hours on Earth. Despite the unimaginable pain inflicted upon him, he refused to give up information about his hidden assets, ongoing operations. His defiance in the face of certain death prevented his killers from gaining access to the full extent of his criminal empire, but it also sealed his fate in the most brutal way possible. The web of betrayal expands. The murder of Wayne Schneider sent shockwaves through the international criminal community, but the reverberations were felt most strongly by Luke Cook, who suddenly found himself caught between multiple deadly forces. Not only was he still responsible for the lost drug shipment that had started this entire nightmare, but he was also connected to Schneider's killer through their shared living arrangements and business relationships, a connection that would soon see him facing the death penalty in a Bangkok courtroom. Cook's involvement with Bagnato ran much deeper than most people realized at the time. When Bagnato fled Thailand after Schneider's murder, it was Cook who provided the getaway car and helped him reach the Cambodian border. This act of loyalty to a friend would later be used against Cook in court, painting him as an active participant in the criminal conspiracy, rather than an unwitting victim who had been manipulated by more experienced criminals. The escape to Cambodia was a desperate gambit that involved multiple people and revealed the true extent of the criminal network operating throughout Southeast Asia. Tyler Gerard, a 22-year-old Australian who had broken his collarbone in a motorcycle accident just days before, found himself unwittingly involved in the escape plan when Bagnato called him for help. Gerard later testified that about 9 hours after Schneider's kidnapping, Bagnato had contacted him in a state of panic, asking for assistance to flee the country because he was scared and needed help from someone he considered a friend. But even as Bagnato was fleeing justice across international borders, Cook was being drawn deeper into the web of criminal activity that surrounded him like quicksand. The Thai police were methodically closing in, using CCTV footage, witness testimony, and financial records to piece together the connections between all the players in this deadly game. Cook's involvement in both the failed drug smuggling operation and Banyato's escape made him a prime target for arrest and prosecution under Thailand's harsh criminal justice system. What made Cook's situation even more precarious was the nature of his other associates in this criminal conspiracy. Douglas Shoebridge, the man he had tricked into diving for the lost drugs, wasn't just an innocent dupe caught up in Cook's schemes. According to Cook's father, Shoebridge was a human trafficker with extensive connections to African prostitution rings operating throughout Bangkok, and his testimony against Cook would prove to be devastating when the case finally went to trial years later. The convergence of all these criminal enterprises, drug smuggling, murder, human trafficking, and international fugitive operations, created a perfect storm of evidence that would ultimately trap Cook and his wife in the Thai justice system for years to come. But their ordeal was just beginning to unfold, and halfway around the world, another drama was developing within the Hells Angels organization that would prove equally destructive to the club's reputation and international operations. The rebel who defied an empire, Aygun Muchuk's rise to power within the German Hells Angels had been marked by violence and betrayal from the very beginning. Nearly 2 years before his brutal assassination, he had staged a coup against longtime member Schnitzel Wolter, sparking turmoil throughout the entire German organization and challenging the traditional power structure that had kept the club stable for decades. According to the Hells Angels' own sacred rules and codes of conduct, such an attack should have resulted in Muchuk's immediate expulsion from the club, but instead of being punished, he was allowed to remain and even establish his own charter in Geishan. This act of rebellion didn't go unnoticed by the American Hells Angels leadership, who viewed the German situation with growing alarm and concern for their global operations. The club's international structure depended entirely on strict hierarchy and absolute obedience to American authority. But Muchuk's actions represented a direct challenge to that system that threatened to undermine their control over chapters worldwide. His defiance reflected the growing influence of Turkish bikers, led by Neko Arabaci, who had systematically filled the void left by Frank Hannebuth's arrest in Mallorca and were pushing for more autonomy from American oversight. The American leadership understood that Germany was absolutely crucial to their global operations and their ability to maintain control over European chapters. In secret meetings held in neutral locations, they attempted to maintain peace between the old-school German bikers who had built the organization and the young Turkish-originated upcomers who represented the future of the club in Europe. These diplomatic efforts were conducted with the same seriousness as international peace negotiations, because everyone involved understood that the stakes were incredibly high. But Muchuk, driven by an insatiable thirst for power and convinced of his own invincibility, ignored all warnings and appeals for diplomatic resolution. He seemed to believe that his position within Germany and his connections to the Turkish criminal underworld made him untouchable, that the American leadership was too distant and too focused on their domestic operations to effectively challenge his growing authority in European affairs. The Americans' patience finally ran out when it became crystal clear that Muchuk had no intention of backing down or accepting their traditional authority over international chapters. In a decision that would send shockwaves through the international biker community and demonstrate the brutal reach of American power, they severed all ties with Muchuk and effectively marked him for death. The message was unmistakably clear to everyone in the organization. No one, regardless of their power, connections, or regional influence, could defy the American Hells Angels and expect to survive the consequences. The execution of this death sentence came with the kind of brutal efficiency that had made the Hells Angels feared throughout the criminal underworld, setting the stage for an even more devastating betrayal that was developing within the organization's North American operations. The making of the ultimate traitor. David Atwell's journey from respected member to the highest-ranking traitor in Hells Angels history began in the most mundane way possible, with financial troubles and growing disillusionment with the criminal lifestyle he had embraced. Born in 1965 in Scarborough, a middle-class Toronto suburb, he had grown up in a loving family with absolutely no intention of ever joining a motorcycle club or becoming involved in organized crime. It was only after working as a bouncer and security guard that he first encountered members of the Paradise Riders, a local outlaw biker club that would change the trajectory of his entire life. The mass patchover ceremony of December 29, 2000, transformed Atwell from a small-time club member into a Hells Angel overnight in one of the most significant events in Canadian criminal history. Along with 167 other bikers from various Ontario outlaw gangs, including Satan's Choice, the Vagabonds, the Lobos, the Last Chance, the Paradise Riders, and some of the Loners, he suddenly found himself part of the most powerful criminal organization in North America. This transition gave Greater Toronto the highest concentration of Hells Angels chapters anywhere in the world, creating an unprecedented concentration of criminal power in a single metropolitan area. What Atwell discovered about life as a Hells Angel was both intoxicating and ultimately disappointing in ways he never could have anticipated. The power and respect that came with wearing the patch were absolutely undeniable. Doors opened without question, debts were forgiven immediately, and fear followed in his wake wherever he went throughout his territory. As he later wrote in his memoir, being a Hells Angel meant never waiting in line at any bar in Scarborough, always finding a great seat reserved for him, and having a cold beer waiting before he even sat down. His patch functioned like an unlimited credit card that he never had to pay off, granting him access to anything he wanted. But behind the glamour and intimidation was a criminal enterprise that demanded complete loyalty while offering little genuine support in return. When Atwell was arrested on drug trafficking charges in April 2002, he discovered that his club brothers were far more concerned about protecting themselves than helping him through his legal troubles. He was forced to move back into his father's house to save money on mounting legal fees, and was even fired from his security job when his association with the Hells Angels was discovered during a background check for an event attended by Prime Minister Paul Martin. The experience of fighting serious criminal charges essentially alone, despite being part of a supposedly tight-knit brotherhood, planted the first seeds of doubt in Atwell's mind about the true nature of the organization he had joined. He began to question whether the Hells Angels were really the family they claimed to be, or just a collection of selfish criminals using each other for personal gain while abandoning members who faced legal troubles. These doubts would fester for several years before finally erupting into the most devastating act of betrayal in the organization's history. Project Develop: The Beginning of the End. In March 2005, Atwell's growing disillusionment with the Hells Angels converged with an opportunity from law enforcement that seemed almost too good to be true. Officers from the Ontario Provincial Police Anti-Biker Enforcement Unit approached him with a carefully crafted offer of $1,850 per week in exchange for information about Hells Angels activities, plus complete immunity from prosecution for his cooperation in what they called Project Develop. What made the offer particularly appealing to Atwell was that it perfectly aligned with his own moral misgivings about the direction his life had taken since joining the organization. He had originally joined the Paradise Riders because he genuinely enjoyed riding motorcycles and wanted to be part of a brotherhood based on shared interests and mutual support, but the Hells Angels had transformed that innocent dream into a nightmare of criminal activity, paranoia, and constant danger. The police were offering him a way out of this lifestyle while also providing the financial security he would need to start over completely. The decision to become an informant wasn't one that Atwell made lightly, understanding fully the consequences of betraying the most dangerous criminal organization in North America. He knew that discovery would mean certain death delivered in the most brutal fashion possible, and that even success would require him to spend the rest of his life in hiding under witness protection. But the alternative, continuing to live as part of an organization that he no longer believed in or respected, seemed even worse than the risks associated with betrayal. Atwell's work as an informant began slowly and cautiously, with seemingly innocent conversations and casual observations about routine club activities. But as his police handlers gained confidence in his abilities and the value of his information, they began asking for increasingly specific and dangerous intelligence. He was equipped with sophisticated recording devices and asked to document conversations about weapons trafficking, drug operations, and planned criminal activities that could result in serious charges against his former brothers. The psychological toll of living as a double agent was enormous and began taking a serious toll on Atwell's mental health. He was forced to maintain normal relationships with men he was secretly betraying on a daily basis, attending their weddings and family gatherings, sharing their most intimate secrets, and pretending to be loyal while systematically gathering evidence that would ultimately destroy their lives and send them to prison for decades. By 2006, the information that Atwell was providing to Project Develop had enabled police to build solid cases against dozens of Hells Angels members across Ontario. But it had also made his position exponentially more dangerous as other informant operations began yielding results that made everyone in the organization suspicious and paranoid about potential betrayal from within their own ranks. The final confrontation. The confrontation that Atwell had been dreading for months finally came in late 2006, and it was every bit as brutal as he had feared it would be. His chapter leaders cornered him in a private meeting and demanded to know directly if he was working for the police. threatening to kill him immediately if they discovered he was the informant they had been desperately searching for. The threat was absolutely credible. The Hells Angels had a long and documented history of murdering traitors in the most brutal fashion possible, and Atwell knew that his life was literally hanging by a thread. That same night, faced with the very real possibility that his cover had been blown completely, Atwell's police handlers made the decision that would end his life as a Hells Angel forever. They ordered him into immediate witness protection and began preparing for the massive coordinated raids that would use his information to systematically destroy the organization he had once served with apparent loyalty. The boy from Scarborough, who had just wanted to ride motorcycles with his friends, was about to become the most important witness in Canadian criminal history. The raids that followed Atwell's extraction from his dangerous position were devastating in their scope and effectiveness. In April 2007, police forces across Ontario simultaneously struck at Hells Angels clubhouses, safe houses, and personal residences, arresting 31 members and seizing millions of dollars worth of drugs, weapons, and cash in coordinated operations that had been planned for months. While the raids were the result of years of careful intelligence gathering from multiple sources, it was Atwell's testimony that provided the crucial evidence needed to secure convictions that would stand up in court. The trial that followed stretched from September 2010 to May 2011, making it one of the longest-running trials in Canadian history, with Atwell serving as the star witness for the prosecution. His testimony revealed the inner workings of the Hells Angels organization in unprecedented detail, exposing everything from their sophisticated drug trafficking operations to their methods of intimidation, violence, and control over criminal territories throughout Ontario. Despite aggressive attacks on his credibility from defense attorneys who portrayed him as a violent criminal seeking only to save himself from prosecution, most of the defendants were ultimately convicted on serious charges ranging from drug trafficking to weapons possession. The convictions represented the single greatest law enforcement victory against the Hells Angels in Canadian history, effectively dismantling their Ontario operations and sending a clear message that no criminal organization was beyond the reach of determined law enforcement. But these victories came at an enormous personal cost for the man who had made them possible, as Atwell discovered when he tried to build a new life under witness protection. The price of ultimate betrayal. Since 2007, David Atwell has lived under witness protection, an existence he describes as profoundly lonely and marked by constant movement and complete lack of stability. The isolation required by his situation means he cannot form meaningful relationships with anyone, because any close connection would inevitably lead to questions about his past that he cannot answer without potentially exposing his identity and location to the Hells Angels members who continue searching for him. As Atwell explained in painful detail, he can only imagine getting close to someone, whether in a friendship, platonic relationship, or intimate relationship with the opposite sex. He can only go so far before that person who cares for him asks the inevitable questions about what happened before, where he came from, and what his life was like before witness protection. These are questions he cannot answer honestly with anyone, creating a barrier to genuine human connection that defines his entire existence. Moreover, Atwell lives in constant paranoia and fear because the Hells Angels organization continues actively looking for him with the goal of exacting their revenge for his betrayal. The organization has never forgotten what he did to them, and they have made it clear through various channels that finding and killing him remains a priority that will never be abandoned, regardless of how many years pass or how well hidden he believes himself to be. While Atwell was beginning his lonely life in witness protection, his betrayal had created a template and methodology that law enforcement agencies around the world would adapt and use to infiltrate and destroy other criminal organizations. His success had definitively proven that even the most secretive, violent, and paranoid criminal groups were vulnerable to betrayal from within their own ranks, setting the stage for similar operations against Hells Angels chapters worldwide and other criminal organizations that had previously seemed untouchable. Meanwhile, halfway around the world, Luke Cook and his wife were about to face their own reckoning as Thai authorities finally moved to arrest them for their role in the failed drug smuggling operation that had started this entire chain of deadly events. The reckoning in Bangkok. December 2017 marked the beginning of the end for Luke Cook and his Thai wife Kanyarat, though they had no idea what awaited them as they stepped off the plane at Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi airport. Returning from what they believed was a routine trip to Australia to visit family, they were immediately arrested by Thai authorities who had been methodically building their case for over 2 years, using CCTV footage, financial records, witness testimony, and confessions from captured co-conspirators. The charges against them were staggering in both scope and severity. conspiracy to import methamphetamine, money laundering, membership in a transnational criminal organization, and accessory to murder. Thai prosecutors had constructed what they believed was an absolutely ironclad case, using evidence that revealed the full scope of Wayne Schneider's criminal operation for the first time. Global Marine Solutions, the front company that had purchased the yacht used in the smuggling attempt, was directly connected to Cook and his wife through an extensive web of financial transactions and legal documents that painted them as central figures in the conspiracy. What made the prosecution's case even more damning was the devastating testimony of Douglas Shoebridge, who had agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for leniency in his own serious legal troubles. Shoebridge painted Cook as a calculating criminal mastermind who had deliberately deceived him about the true nature of their underwater recovery mission, presenting Cook's drunken confession about the drugs as evidence of his guilty knowledge and active participation from the very beginning of the operation. The trial itself became a grueling 4-year ordeal, during which Cook and his wife were held in some of Thailand's most notorious prisons under conditions that were harsh even by local standards. Their access to adequate legal representation was severely limited by financial constraints and language barriers, while the overwhelming weight of evidence against them seemed to make conviction inevitable. Thailand's justice system had developed a well-deserved reputation for imposing harsh sentences in drug cases, making the death penalty not just a possibility, but a strong probability given the scale of the operation they were accused of facilitating. On November 14, 2018, at exactly 5:30 p.m., Luke Cook and his wife stood in a Bangkok courtroom and heard the words they had been dreading for years. Guilty on all charges, sentenced to death. The father of two was led away in chains, facing the very real possibility of execution for crimes that had begun with nothing more than a desperate desire to save his failing businesses and provide security for his family. But their story was far from over as international pressure began building for a review of their case and the circumstances surrounding their conviction. The aftermath and unexpected redemption. The international outcry that followed Cook's death sentence was immediate and sustained, with lobbyist groups and Australian parliamentarians demanding a thorough review of the case. Critics pointed to numerous procedural errors in the trial, inadequate legal representation, and questions about the reliability of key witness testimony that had formed the foundation of the prosecution's case against Cook and his wife. After 4 years of unimaginable horror in Thai prisons, during which Cook and his wife faced the daily possibility of execution, their persistence and the efforts of their supporters finally paid off. An appeals court cited significant procedural errors and constitutional violations in their original trial, ultimately overturning their convictions and commuting their death sentences. They returned to Australia as free people, though forever marked by their ordeal and serving as a living cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of becoming involved with international criminal organizations. Their case demonstrated both the global reach of modern criminal networks and the international cooperation required to combat them effectively, while also highlighting the human cost of drug trafficking operations that destroy lives on multiple continents. Cook's story serves as a powerful reminder that the criminal underworld preys specifically on desperation and financial vulnerability, turning what seems like an easy solution to money problems into a nightmare of violence, imprisonment, and potential death. The murders of Wayne Schneider and Agun Muchuk illustrated the brutal internal dynamics that continue to plague outlaw motorcycle clubs around the world, showing that these organizations may present themselves as brotherhoods bound by loyalty and honor, but the reality is often very different. A world where betrayal and murder are commonplace tools of business and survival. David Atwell's ongoing life in witness protection represents the permanent consequences of betraying powerful criminal organizations, serving simultaneously as both an inspiration to other potential informants who might be considering cooperation with law enforcement and a sobering warning about the price that must inevitably be paid for such decisions. The legacy of destruction. The men who almost destroyed the Hells Angels succeeded in ways they never intended or anticipated. Through their individual acts of greed, violence, and betrayal, they exposed fundamental vulnerabilities within the organization and provided law enforcement agencies worldwide with the intelligence, methodology, and evidence needed to strike devastating blows against criminal operations that had previously seemed untouchable. Today, the Hells Angels organization continues to operate in countries around the world, but it has been forever changed by the events described in these interconnected stories of betrayal and destruction. The mass arrests and convictions that resulted from operations like Project Develop have made the organization significantly more paranoid and security conscious in their operations. but they have also revealed critical vulnerabilities that law enforcement agencies continue to exploit through similar infiltration and informant operations. The case of Luke Cook and his wife demonstrates the truly global reach of modern criminal networks and the level of international cooperation that has become necessary to combat them effectively. Their 4-year ordeal in the Thai justice system serves as a stark reminder of how quickly ordinary people can become entangled in criminal conspiracies that span multiple countries and involve organizations capable of extreme violence. The stories of Wayne Schneider's torture and murder by Antonio Bagnato and Agun Muchuk's assassination for defying American authority illustrate the violent internal dynamics that continue to characterize outlaw motorcycle clubs throughout the world. These organizations may market themselves to potential members and the general public as brotherhoods based on loyalty, honor, and mutual support. But the reality revealed by these cases is often very different. A brutal world where betrayal and murder are routine business practices. David Atwell's transformation from loyal member to the most damaging informant in Hell's Angels history demonstrates that no criminal organization, regardless of its reputation for violence or its emphasis on loyalty and silence, is immune to infiltration and destruction from within its own ranks. His success in helping law enforcement dismantle major criminal operations proved that even the most secretive and paranoid organizations have fundamental weaknesses that can be exploited by determined investigators working with inside sources. The legacy of these 5 men continues to reverberate through the international criminal underworld years after the events described here took place. Their stories serve as both cautionary tales for those who might be tempted by the apparent glamour and easy money offered by criminal organizations, and as inspiration for law enforcement agencies seeking to develop new strategies for combating organized crime in an increasingly connected global economy. The greatest threat to the Hells Angels has never been rival criminal organizations, aggressive law enforcement operations, or government crackdowns. It has been the very men who wore their patches, claimed to uphold their values, and then chose personal gain over organizational loyalty when the stakes became high enough. The line between brotherhood and betrayal, it turns out, is often much thinner than anyone realizes until it has already been crossed permanently.